You're listening to an interview taken from the Tonic talk show and podcast, heard exclusively on Zoomer Radio. To download or listen to the original episode or other episodes of The Tonic, please visit thetonic.ca.
Mark Halpern is a certified financial planner, trust and estate practitioner, master financial advisor, philanthropy. Mark has helped business owners, entrepreneurs, professionals, and affluent families for 30 years. As CEO of WealthInsurance.com, Mark and his team provide tax-advantaged insurance solutions to protect families and their businesses, working closely with accountants, lawyers, bankers, and other financial professionals to provide comprehensive estate planning solutions for their clients. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Excellent, Jamie. So nice to be here.
Yeah, so we've been covering so much of COVID over the past 2 years, as you might imagine. Mm-hmm. And, we are talking about all the aspects of COVID and how it's really impacting on the physical and mental health. But, your team sent me some information that I found shocking and surprising that I'd like to share with the listeners. And then, I'd like to discuss it with you because it all sort of surrounds this concept that, financial stress can affect you literally, physically, and mentally, right? Mm-hmm. So what was interesting to me is more than half, so 51% of Canadians have lost sleep over money issue concerns over the past year. And nearly one third say that financial stress has caused health issues, which is a stark increase over the past 12 months. And, it's not surprising that people are stressed out, but it's interesting to hear how that stress manifests, yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
You started your professional practice 30 years ago. Let's get a little bit of background. You're new to the show. Why did you enter the insurance business?
So thanks, Jamie. So yes, I've been in professional practice for 30 years, but my real start was actually 47 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's when my father, of blessed memory, died of a massive heart attack at the age of 50. I was 11. I was the youngest of 4 boys, and my mother at the time, who was 48, had to go back to work to support our family. The reason was that my father was a very busy engineer. And of course, unfortunately, there was no will when he passed away. There was very little savings, and there was no life insurance. So it was very difficult for us growing up. Fortunately, we all turned out pretty good and professionals. But, fast forward, I work with some of the most successful business owners and entrepreneurs and retirees and wealthy families, and you'd think they'd have everything all organized and together. But I'd suggest, 80% of the time it's not true. They're so busy looking after everything and everyone else that when it comes to themselves, they just don't have things organized. So it's really important to have that conversation to see what are those incompletions that people should be looking into.
We're going to focus on incompletions. Your story is similar to mine in that, my family history sort of shapes my professional journey. So my father also died of a heart attack when he was younger, not quite as young as your dad. But at the time, he was suffering from many illnesses. I was in a bad place physically. I was morbidly obese, and I realized if I didn't fix myself, I was going to end up in the same sort of health pattern that he did. And I think what I'm hearing from you is you learned if you didn't fix yourself financially and fix these gaps that we're talking about, you could have been in the same place with your family, right?
Absolutely. And I look at just the effects of COVID.
Right.
It's been a very, very busy year for us, fortunately. And that's because for 30 years, I've been trying to convince people that they're going to die, get sick, or retire one day, and nobody believed me. And suddenly it took a global plague for people to be much more aware of their mortality and those incompletions. And that's why people are giving it the attention that perhaps they didn't give before because of the fact that they realize that, the time to take care of all this stuff is clearly while the sun is shining.
So you've been dealing with this, I guess, during COVID, where people are finally turning their minds to this. What sort of issues and concerns are they bringing to you?
I like to sort of summarize what I think is on everybody's minds, but they maybe are not able to articulate it so well. And I kind of break it into 3 questions. The first one is, people want to know if I wanted to retire at some point, will I ever be in a situation where I can?
Right.
So pick a date, just even if it's aspirational. Secondly, they want to know that if something were to happen to them, that their family is looked after, or at least they're also looked after financially. And the third is they want to know that if, God forbid, they're not around, are they going to be paying a lot of taxes or getting the government involved in their affairs? So it's kind of, those 3 questions are really 3 important points. One, the first one is a retirement question.
Right.
Second one is a risk management question. And the third one's an estate planning question. So it's really important to, instead of be looking at one of these things myopically, you need to have it more holistic and look at these from 30,000 feet up and sort of see, where am I at right now? What are my gaps? And what are the things that I need to sort of put some effort into?
Okay, so you use the phrase planning, right? because you are a financial planner.
Yep.
A lot of people think that's synonymous with investing. Is planning the same thing as investing?
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, the world out there is busy doing investing. You know, the returns, I made this amount of money in my RSP, etc. Investing and planning are very different. Investing is really looking at three things. It's one about preserving what you have. So it's not the second part of it is maximizing the income that you're making. Again, if you stop working and your money's working for you, you have to look after that. And the third is really tax efficiency. Like, am I being tax efficient? So I think what people really want is they want a check mark. They want that check mark to know that, hey, I can retire at such and such a time based on my current lifestyle expense, etc. This is what my tax will be now. This is what my taxes might be at life expectancy. Here's a whole bunch of never spend money, perhaps, that, you know, I'm partnering with the government on in terms of taxes. Can I use that to preserve my estate for my family or for charities or things like that? So it's a very different approach in terms of planning versus investing. And that's why people need to seek out a coach to help them sometimes, because it's not really a do-it-yourself type of thing.
Okay. I'm sure there's different sort of people that come to you. There's people that are married. There's people that are perhaps divorced, maybe single, maybe widowed. Who needs to be concerned? Is everybody coming to you with the same sort of concerns and that you're equally concerned about their position? Yeah,
look, there's no cookie cutter here. Every situation is unique. It doesn't matter if you're married, single, family, retiree. It's important to sort of get a snapshot on where you're at. But in particular, and this is important for your listeners, people who are single, widowed, or divorced have to be concerned because the government is actually prejudiced against them.
Right.
And the reason is, Jamie, is that when you die in Canada and you have a spouse, everything rolls over to your spouse tax-free. It's called a spousal tax-free rollover. But if you're single, widowed, or divorced, and you have a disposition, some sort of liquidity event, you're taxed at that moment. That means if somebody's sitting there, as I was speaking to a 76-year-old woman just a few days ago, she was sitting with like $3.6 million in a RIF. Mm-hmm. And not aware of the fact that 54% of that money is going to go to the government. That's over about $1.9 million that she was not aware of. And I would suggest that most Canadians don't know that. That's why this planning is so important to do.
Okay, I'm speculating here, but I'm looking at all the money that the government has been printing over the past, 18 months. And they got to make up for it somehow. With interest rates so low, they have a couple of options. One is to raise the HST, but they've got to be careful with that because if they raise it too much, they'll kill the economy. But the easy, low-hanging fruit for a government like the Liberals, in my view, is to up the estate tax rates. Are you hearing anything about that? Are you concerned at all that the government's going to try and pull in more money like that?
It's not a question of if, Jamie. It's a question of when. Yeah. Where's the money going to come from to pay for all this?
Right.
These billions of dollars, or in the States, trillions of dollars. So, where are they going to find the money? Yes, you mentioned about an HST. Look, we're talking about a wealth tax, an inheritance tax, a tax on principal residence. They're looking into that out in BC. Imagine, you sell your house and you make $1 million on it. Well, the first $500,000 they say is yours, but we want a part of that next $500,000. So if anything, more than ever, that's why people really need to give this attention, because you got to know, that this stuff is really renting space in our brain. It's in our subconscious. And, people don't have wills, or they don't have up-to-date wills. They don't have powers of attorney. I mean, basic estate planning. And I always joke, but I'm serious, that if people really knew what they didn't know, they wouldn't be able to sleep at night until they got these things done.
Right.
And that's really affecting us subconsciously. That's why the numbers are so high in terms of people's fears around finances now, especially coming out of COVID. And if people have children at home, those people are even more stressed out. So that's why it's really important just to have the conversation, put it out on the table. It's not something we are excited about. We'd rather go to the mall and buy something nice or take a ride in the country or whatever. But it's like the time to deal with all of this is clearly while the sun is shining, because then it gives you a lot more options, a lot more flexibility, and it's important for your mental and physical health.
And I would say there's even a cohort that have probably turned their mind to these issues perhaps when they were younger, but the circumstances change, right? Like maybe your marital situation has changed, or maybe the needs of your children have changed, or maybe your employment situation has changed. You thought you were in a stable career, but COVID has demonstrated that perhaps you're not. So my view is, even if you have all this in place, you might want to revisit it just to make sure that it still makes the same amount of sense, right?
Absolutely, Jamie. I always tell people it's kind of like financial architecture. You started off with a certain financial architecture and you had some financial furniture that fit that architecture. But fast forward, your architecture can look completely different. The question is your financial furniture up to date?
Right.
And that could be things like a will. That could be like life insurance. Think about people who are retiring and suddenly they're leaving the umbrella of their employer with their health benefits and their life insurance and their sickness insurance. Well, now they're on their own. That umbrella has disappeared. You have to plan for those things in advance so that you can take advantage of the best and most efficient strategies for your family.
So I think you made a comment earlier that people have a choice where their taxes go. What did you mean by that?
So it really, all of us are going to have three beneficiaries, Jamie, to our estate. You're going to have your family, you're going to have the tax department, and you're going to have charity. And each of us can only pick two of those. Jamie, which two would you pick?
I think I would pick family. I think I'm going to say family.
Good. I don't have to call
I'm not a huge fan of paying taxes. I'll go with charity.
Okay, great. So, yeah, charity, those are generally the answers that we get. Unless, listen, we live in a great country. We need taxes for schools and roads and hospitals and the rest of it. But most people would take family and charity. So with proper planning, you can actually be remembered for writing a big check to charities that you're passionate about as opposed to writing a big check to the tax department. But again, that comes back to planning and philanthropy in particular, which is a big part of our practice. We like to help people convert taxes into charity, or as we call it, create accidental philanthropists. Because once, you can either have the DNA that you like to give, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe you don't have the DNA you like to give. But once you find out how much money is going to the government and you have a choice to give that to charity, suddenly you become very philanthropic.
You become a giver, yeah.
You do. So these are the types of things that require some sort of a conversation. But we last year as an organization created over $61 million of planned legacy gifts, working with our clients and working with nonprofits and working with allied professionals who bring us in and introduce us. So it's a very rewarding part of our business, but it's also about mental health. Because I want to tell you, being philanthropic, when you give, you get much more than you give. And it's also just a beautiful way of transferring values and ethics to your children, and more importantly, to your grandchildren. We're living in a crazy time, and we want to try to inculcate them with those messages. So if you can convert those taxes into charity, it's a big win-win for everybody.
So, I'm imagining our listeners sort of listening to what we're talking about. Some people will say, yeah, you know what, I'm into this. I'm going to get on it right away. And then there's going to be others who are going to say, I wish I knew about this a while ago. I think it's too late to sort of take these steps. Is it too late for people? Is it ever too late?
Jamie, it's never too late. It's too late after you're gone, or you've lost your mind and you have very few options at that point. So the best time to look after this is today. Just don't put off for tomorrow as you can do today, as my late mother used to say, right? Yeah. So definitely take advantage of that now. And I just met with an 80-year-old woman a couple of months ago, and she was worth about $10 million. She'd done very well. She was a widow. And when I met with her, I explained to her she wasn't worth $10 million. She was only worth $6.5 million because of all the taxes that she was not aware of. So at the age of 80, we were able to plan where instead her family was going to get $10 million. The government was only going to get $500,000, and we were going to create $3 million for charity. And that was at the age of 80. So it's never too late.
Okay. So you do a lot of work in philanthropy. Maybe you can explain why that's such a big aspect of your business, and how does that help people with their stress?
I grew up in a very philanthropic home. My mother, even though she was, struggling financially, was always giving to, the Cancer Society and anybody who would knock on the door. And she always had a pile of those $5 tax receipts. Those receipts, sure, Yeah. So that was part of our life. And then I realized that I'm in a very unique profession where there's a lot of misinformation around it, especially around the use of tax-exempt life insurance as a strategy to create transformational legacy gifts. And it's not something you have to do by the name of Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. It's anybody can be charitable. And I was, I can either write a check myself, or I can get other people to write checks, and I can create way more money by getting other people to write these checks. So it's a very aspirational thought that not only clients have, but I have a huge cohort of professional advisors who are tapping on me to join them and work with their clients to create this philanthropy, because we're living in a time of hyper specialty. So they want me to help them, and it's exciting for them. They can do good, and they can do good for their clients. And the beautiful part is the clients feel good. And there's nothing that tastes as good as doing good feels. You know what I mean? So you can have that piece of cake or that ice cream, but if you can make some change, and again, small dollars can create big dollars, then it's really worth investing some time into that. It's just great for mental health, physical health, and for passing along beautiful values to your family.
Fantastic. If people are motivated to reach out to you to get more information, how do they do that?
So they can send me an email to mark@WealthInsurance.com, or they can give us a call at 416-871-4357, or go online to WealthInsurance.com and fill out a request for information there or for an interview. You know, look, it's like going to the doctor, Jamie. We don't know how we can help anybody until we sort of do the proper diagnostics. The prescription's easy once we know what's wrong. So having that conversation, there's no charge for that, Jamie. It's really seeing if we're the right address for the client, they're the right address for us, and we'll either work together or we'll bring in other professionals to help them, or we'll collaborate with their existing professionals. But it really starts with making that phone call and starting the process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It was really a pleasure, and thanks for inviting me.